Have you ever rubbed a piece of parchment paper over your tab? I'll show you this and 6 other incredibly ingenious tricks with parchment paper in this video. You'll be amazed at what you can do with parchment paper. But let's start with one of the best tricks if you use parchment paper regularly. You should always crumble it up in your hand before you lay it out on your baking tray. And there's a really brilliant reason for this. Because you're probably familiar with this problem too. You want to lay out the parchment paper on your baking tray and it just rolls up again. And even if you lay it the other way around, it sometimes rolls up again or doesn't stay evenly on the baking tray. But all you have to do is take it, press it together completely in your hands as you can see here, and then unfold it again. It's actually really quick, and then you can see that it no longer rolls up. Of course it doesn't look as nice as it used to, but it's only supposed to serve as a base and doesn't have to look good. And it doesn't change anything about what you put on the baking paper. It now fits perfectly on the tray. You will no doubt be familiar with a similar problem if you want to place a piece of baking paper in a cake tin like this. This also always comes up, but there's an ingenious trick that you can use to fix this really quickly. Turn the cake tin upside down, place the piece of baking paper on the back and fold the corners over as you can see me doing. This will fold it into the right shape for your baking tin, and all you have to do afterwards is turn it over again and put the baking paper inside. It will now stay perfectly in the tin and won't fall out. But do you already know the trick why you should lay out baking paper on your kitchen cupboards? There's a really ingenious reason for this too, because baking paper can help you to clean your kitchen much less often or make it much easier to clean an area that you don't clean so often. I'm talking about the places in your kitchen. This is where a lot of dust and dirt and sometimes grease from cooking accumulates. This can be a real pain if you want to wipe it off at some point. To avoid having to do this regularly, you should lay out some baking paper in the kitchen. Secure it with adhesive tape and all the dirt will now collect on it. The advantage is also that depending on whether you use light or dark baking paper, you should be able to ensure that it is not visible from below. This means that nobody can see that you have laid baking paper on the kitchen. But after a while, when you want to clean the kitchen, you don't have to wipe off all the dirt here. Just replace the baking paper with a new one and the kitchen cupboards will actually stay completely clean. You can even use baking paper to combat flies if you have them in your home but don't want them here. To do this, we need to prepare the whole thing a little. Grab some standard baking paper and cut it into thinner strips as you can see in my picture. But that's not all, of course. We now need to apply a mixture to these strips of baking paper so that we can remove the flies from our home. But the first step is to make a ribbon. We want to put this through the top so that we can hang up the strips of baking paper at the end. To do this, make a small hole in the top end of the piece of baking paper. Wrap a ribbon through it and tie it here. Once you've done this, we just need to smear something on the baking paper to attract the flies. Because we want to achieve in the end is that the flies don't just fly around our home and annoy us, but that they get to this piece of baking paper and stick to it. And that works really well with honey, because honey attracts the flies and they stick to it. So all you have to do is smear some honey on the piece of baking paper and your homemade fly trap is ready. You can now hang it up somewhere in your home or outside, for example. If you want to eat outside, this is a real trick for luring the flies away from your food and attracting them to this spot where they then stick. And once you've done this trick for the first time, you'll never do it any other way again. Because if you use a sandwich maker regularly, then you know that the biggest problem is cleaning it up at the end. Cheese that has leaked or other things are sometimes very burnt and it's not that easy to get it completely clean again. But all you really need is baking paper. You can take some baking paper, cut it to size beforehand or simply leave it whole and place it on your sandwich maker as you can see in my picture. It's best to fold it once in the middle so that you have the center fold of the sandwich maker already in place. This will make it easier to close later. Now fold the baking paper as you can see here. What you need to do in the next step is simply prepare your sandwich as you normally would. Once you have done this, you can place your sandwich on the baking paper and then close the sandwich maker. This works as usual. What you need to bear in mind now, however, is that the sandwich may take a little longer, but not much longer, about 20 to 60 seconds if you leave them in the sandwich maker for longer. But it's definitely worth it, because in the end, as you can see here with me, all the cheese that has run out of the sandwich is no longer stuck in your sandwich maker, but simply on a piece of baking paper, which you can dispose of. This way you never have to clean a sandwich maker again and it stays as good as new for much longer. Give it a try and I assure you that you'll never do it without baking paper again. I have two ingenious variations for you for our next trick, because you will no doubt be familiar with another problem if you want to put a piece of baking paper in a round tin. For the first variant, you simply have to place the baking paper on top, place the cake ring around it and close the whole thing. When the springform tin is closed, the baking paper is already perfectly positioned. Now you just have to go around the outside with a pair of scissors and cut off the baking paper once. It's really quick. And then you have the baking paper in the springform tin. There's not much baking paper sticking out at the bottom and it holds up perfectly. So you can use it like this. Another option is to take the whole piece of baking paper and fold it once in the center in the first step. We now repeat the whole thing so that we have a square like this. We then fold it once to the side so that we get a funnel shape and do the whole thing twice. In the end the piece should look like the one you see here. Now go to the bottom of your springform tin and hold the tip here in the center of the springform tin. Now you need to cut off everything that overlaps the side edge of the springform tin. And now you have a perfectly round piece of baking paper. By the way, if it doesn't fit the first time, you can fold it up again and just cut off a small corner at the top. How much is left over, and then you can put it in and it will fit perfectly in the springform tin. But probably the most ingenious trick is to rub a piece of baking paper over your tap. Take a standard piece of baking paper, fold it up a little so that you can hold it better in your hand. Or simply cut out a piece. Now go to your tap and start rubbing the piece of baking paper over your tap. Just like that, without water or anything else. Because of the coating on the baking paper, you will be able to remove limescale perfectly. As you can see here, you only have to wipe over it a few times and the limescale stains that are still on the tap will disappear completely. Not only will you get the tap clean, but due to the coating of the baking paper, you will also apply a little of it to the tap and can thus ensure that new limescale stains no longer appear so quickly. You will therefore have to clean it much less often in future if you have used this technique, and you will actually get the limescale off better than with some cleaners. Incidentally, it doesn't matter whether the baking paper is light or dark in color. It's all about the coating you have on each piece of baking paper. But that's not all, because I'm now going to show you how it even works on stubborn limescale stains. You can of course use this method on your shower taps. We usually find a lot more limescale stains here, as they generally come into contact with a lot more water. As you can see in my case, it's already heavily calcified. And if I just rub it over a few times, you won't see any more limescale stains, because the limescale has completely disappeared thanks to the baking paper. It works on all taps, whether in the shower, in the bathroom or even in your kitchen. But there is one other place where this trick works really well, on the shower door. Here you have to rub a little more, but you can also remove really stubborn limescale stains with a piece of baking paper. Again, simply rub it over and in the end you won't see any more limescale stains and everything will be really nice and clean again, and all thanks to a bit of baking paper. Would you now also like to know why you should definitely light your toothbrush and what you can do with it? Then be sure to watch the video linked to you here on the screen.